Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. The Supreme Court is about to hear a case that asks, in the starkest way possible, who gets to be American? Trump versus Barbara isn't just an immigration case, and it isn't just another Trump story. It's a case about whether the United States can walk back one of the clearest, most hard-won promises in our Constitution, that if you were born here, you belong here. Today I want to talk about what that really means, not in abstract law school terms, but in human terms, in power terms, in terms of what kind of country we're choosing to be. Because this case is about more than paperwork and precedent. It's about whether the government gets to turn the world, we, into a weapon. So let's start with the basics. Trump v. Barbara is the test case for Donald Trump's executive order denying birthright citizenship to children of undocumented parents. Under that order, a child born in a U.S. hospital, raised in a U.S. town, pledging allegiance to the U.S. flag at school, can still be told, "You are not one of us, you never will be." For more than a century, the rule has been the opposite. If you are born on U.S. soil, with a few narrow exceptions, you are a citizen. That's not some quirky tradition. That's the core promise of the 14th Amendment. It was written into the Constitution after the Civil War because the country had just seen what happens when powerful people get to decide who counts. Before the Civil War, before the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court in Dred Scott said that black people had no rights, which the white man was bound to respect. That decision didn't just say enslaved people weren't citizens. It said their descendants never could be, no matter what. It was a doctrine of permanent exclusion written into law. After the horror of that era, Congress said, "Never again." They wrote a sentence that was meant to be crystal clear. All persons born and naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. Not all persons we like, not all persons with the right paperwork, not all persons whose parents came in through the right line. All persons. That was the point, to slam the door shut on the idea that a political majority or a racist court could decide child by child who really belongs here. Now Trump's executive order in this case are about prying that door back open. The order takes a phrase in the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction, and tries to turn it into a trapdoor. The argument goes like this: if your parents are undocumented, then you were never really under U.S. jurisdiction, in the way the 14th Amendment requires. Therefore, no citizenship for you. On paper, it sounds like a technical debate over a few words. In practice, it's a move to resurrect the logic behind Dred Scott, the idea that there is a class of people born here who can never fully belong, no matter what they do, no matter how many generations they put down roots. To understand how radical that is, you have to step back and look at the longer arc. For years, the right's message on immigration was framed as, "We just want to enforce the border." It sounded managerial, neutral, fixing a broken system. Build the wall, secure the line, restored order. It was sold as housekeeping, not ideology. But then you look at the actual policies. The Muslim ban was not a technical fix to a visa backlog. It was a declaration that certain nationalities, certain faiths, were suspect by default. It said your passport and your religion mark you as a threat before we know anything else about you. Family separation at the border was not an accidental glitch. It was a deliberate strategy. Inflict such intense pain on parents and children that other desperate families would be too terrified to come. That's not enforcement. That's using cruelty as public policy. Mass ICE raids on workplaces and neighborhoods weren't just routine law enforcement. They were theater. They told everyone watching, some people can go to work, drop off their kids, live their lives without fear. Others can have their world shattered by a knock on the door at 5 a.m. All of that sets the stage for Trump v. Barbara. If you start by controlling who may enter, then you escalate to controlling how they live once they're here. The next logical step is to control who can ever fully belong. At a certain point, you're not managing immigration anymore. You're curating identity. That's where this case comes in. Denying birthright citizenship to children born here to undocumented parents sends out one brutal message. There's nothing you can do from your first breath to your last that will ever move you from outsider to one of us. It says that the accident of your parents' status at the moment of your birth brands you forever. Not because you broke a law, not because of anything you chose, but because you existed. That's transforming immigration status from a legal problem that can be fixed into a hereditary stain. Now, supporters of the border wall will wrap this into high-minded language. They'll talk about the rule of law. They'll warn about birth tourism. They'll say they're stopping people from gaming the system. But look closely at what system they're actually talking about. The system here isn't a visa office. It's the Constitution. Yes, there have always been narrow exceptions to birthright citizenship. Children of foreign diplomats, for example, are treated differently because their parents literally represent another sovereign state and are not subject to U.S. laws in the same way. That's a unique category, carved out for a specific reason. Undocumented workers are the opposite of that. They live under U.S. laws in every meaningful way. They can be arrested by U.S. officers. They can be tried in U.S. courts. They can be deported by U.S. agencies. They pay taxes. They send their kids to public schools. They drive on public roads. When they break the law, they don't get to claim diplomatic immunity. If anyone is subject to this jurisdiction of the United States, it is them. So when you say their children, born here, raised here, are outside the promise of the 14th Amendment, you're not honoring the text. You're bending it. You're carving a disfavored population out of the people the Constitution was meant to protect. And once you create that carve-out, it doesn't say small. If the Supreme Court blesses this move, the effects won't stay at the border or in the law reviews. They will seep into the way politicians talk about belonging across the board. We're already hearing rhetoric that certain kids born to certain immigrants are not real Americans. We've heard people question whether dual citizens can be trusted. We've watched political opponents painted as somehow fundamentally un-American, not just wrong on policy. Now imagine that rhetoric backed by a Supreme Court decision that says, in effect, yes, the government does have the power to say that being born here isn't enough. You can see the next steps. First, it's children of undocumented parents. Then maybe it's children whose parents overstayed visas. Then maybe it's families whose paperwork can't be perfectly traced in some federal database. Maybe suddenly having a second passport or grandparents from the wrong country becomes grounds for doubting your status. We like to think that's too extreme, that it could never go that far. But once you've accepted the principle that some American-born children can be written out of the national we, there is no obvious limiting principle. There is only politics and power. And then there's a human reality on the ground. If you undermine birthright citizenship, you don't just create a clever theoretical category. You create a generation of people inside the United States who are stateless or semi-stateless. They grow up here, but the country they live in tells them legally, you're not ours. The countries their parents left may not recognize them either, or maybe places they have never set foot. What does life look like in that limbo? It means more exploitation at work because your lack of status makes it risky to complain, risky to join a union, risky to speak up. It means being more vulnerable to abuse in housing, in services, in daily life, because who do you go to when the system itself has tagged you as an outsider? It means being easier to silence and harder to organize. And that is not a bug. That is a feature. From the perspective of those in power, an underclass without secure legal status is cheaper to hire, easier to control, and politically voiceless. They can't easily vote you out. They can't demand equal treatment on election day. They exist in the shadows, contributing to the economy, but locked out of the full protections of the community. That's what's at stake in this case. Not just a line in the Constitution, but whether we deliberately manufacture a permanent, exploitable underclass inside our own borders. This is why it's a mistake to treat Trump v. Barbera as some narrow technical fight over an obscure phrase like subject to this jurisdiction. It's the capstone of a decade-long project to use immigration law as an identity filter for the nation itself. Think of the timeline. The Muslim ban said your faith makes you suspect. Family separation said your parenthood isn't sacred, it's leverage. Mass ICE raids said your very presence, your job, your home, Your child's school is conditional. It can be shattered to make a point. Now, this case asks the court to say, your birth here, your first breath in this country, your entire life on this soil, can be treated as legally meaningless if we decide your parents never belonged. That is now how a confident democracy behaves. A confident democracy has a simple, durable answer to who is one of us, and then it lives with the consequences of that answer. It doesn't constantly redraw the circle every time a politician wants a new scapegoat. A confident democracy trusts that people born under its laws, raised in its communities, speaking its language, learning its history, are not a threat to be managed, but citizens to be welcomed. It trusts its own ability to integrate, to absorb, to grow. The 14th Amendment is that trust, written into constitutional text. It says, we know this is risky. We know that some people born here will criticize this country, protest it, demand that it live up to its own ideals. We know that some will challenge power, and we're okay with that, because that's what citizenship means. Trump's executive order and the legal arguments defending it are an attempt to turn that guarantee into a loophole, to convert a shield against political whim into a tool of political control. So when the Supreme Court hears Trump v. Barbara, the justices will wade through the usual materials: text, history, precedent, footnotes, law review articles. That's their job. But underneath all of that is a question that's brutally simple. Do we still believe in birthright citizenship as a check on political power? As a shield against the government deciding case by case who counts as a person with full membership in the community? Or are we willing to say that belonging itself is now up for negotiation? That your right to call yourself American can depend on the mood of the moment and the identity of your parents? Everything we've seen in the last decade, from the Muslim ban to family separation to ICE dragnets, points toward that second, uglier answer. A vision of the country where we the people is not a commitment, but a weapon, a club that can be closed as needed. The court doesn't just have a chance to stop one executive order. It has a chance to put a stake in the ground about that broader project. It can say, no, you cannot carve out an entire class of American-born children and tell them they are permanent outsiders. No, you cannot sneak Dred Scott in through the back door by pretending that parents you arrest, tax, and deport are somehow not really under your jurisdiction. No, you cannot turn the 14th Amendment into a tool for exclusion. Or it can blink. It can accept the logic that some births don't count, that some kids born under the same sky, in the same hospitals, in the same cities, are less than others. If it does that, the damage won't be confined to immigrant communities, because once the state has claimed the power to unmake its own people, to say you thought you were one of us, but we've changed our minds, that power doesn't stop at any one group. They can do it to the children of undocumented parents today. They can find a reason to do it to someone else tomorrow. So as this case moves forward, don't let anyone tell you it's just about border security or abuse of the system or some narrow dispute over a clause few people have read. It's about whether Americans born tomorrow will have the same automatic claim to belonging that Americans born yesterday took for granted. It's about whether the word citizen is a promise or just another status this government can hand out and snatch back when it's politically convenient. The court should say no, not just to this particular executive order, but no to the idea that citizenship is a privilege the powerful can redefine at will. Because once you accept the premise that some American-born children can be permanently written out of the national we, you've already given up the most dangerous power of all, the power of the state to unmake its own people. And if a democracy gives that up, if it normalizes that power, then the question who gets to be an American stops being a moral debate and becomes something much darker. It becomes a warning. This has been America's Fractured Politics. Thank you for tuning in, for your support, and for your recommendations. They are much appreciated. Until next time, keep fighting. Our freedom is in jeopardy. Thank you.